All right. Well, hello and welcome to Open Source Directions hosted by Quansight. This is the webinar that brings you details about where open source projects are headed. My name is Anthony Skopatz, your host for Open Source Directions. And joining me today is Tony. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tony Fast. I'm excited to co-host this first episode of Open Source Directions. I'm an open source consultant at Quansight, and I'm a community organizer based out of Atlanta, Georgia.
And in our third guest seat is Brian Vandeven, the lead developer of Bokeh. Brian, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a bit?
Well, I think you just did. So, yeah, my name is Brian Vandeven, and I worked for Anaconda Incorporated, which is formerly Continuum Analytics. I've been working on a number of open source projects there over the past about 6.5 years now. I used to do a little work on Conda a long time ago, and lots of other people have taken that over and pushed it further and better. But for the most part, at the last several years, I've been working on Bokeh and just trying to get to a great point of stability where we can hopefully get it more into maintenance mode, where it's very stable. It's a very secure platform for people to build things on top of.
Thanks, Brian. So before we get into the juicy details of Bokeh, we're going to talk a little bit about just some brief open source headlines from the past week. So, Tony, I believe you had something there that you wanted to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to mention to everybody that this week Project Jupyter pushed a security fix for the Jupyter notebook that helps or that stops malicious JavaScript from being executed. So anybody, all the many Jupyter users out there, it's probably wise to update your current Jupyter notebook version. And when you update the notebook, you will also update your lab.
Cool, thanks. For my part, I'd just like to do a brief SciPy 2018 recap. So first of all the videos are online, and you should go and watch them. There are some really great talks, a lot of discussion about various NumPy backends and such. The highlight for me personally, as always, is the lightning talks, though. And this year in particular, at the end of the lightning talks on our third day, we had a brief standing ovation to Guido van Rossum, commemorating his quote-unquote long vacation from being the Python benevolent dictator for life. So if you go right to the end of the third day lightning talks, you can go and see that moment. So, and I believe Gil Forsyth tweeted it out. So it was very touching for all of us there in the room. Okay, so that sort of concludes our news section. But so now we get to dive into Bokeh and what it is. So you just described the project a bit, but I think Tony put together a really nice summary of all of the statistics on GitHub and etc. So if you wanted to go ahead and present that, Tony, you're welcome to.
Well, Bokeh is a very active project, and it looks like on Conda there's upwards of 190,000 downloads a month, and pip about 63,000 downloads a month. Very, very popular. There's 304 contributors. I actually did not know that I was doing this. Sorry. There's 300 contributors, and oh goodness, where did those stars go? I wasn't prepared. Continue on.
Yeah, it's got a lot of stars. Do you know ballpark, Brian, about how many?
I think
stars?
It just passed 7,900.
7,900.
Yeah,
there you go. 7,900. We had all these growth charts written in Bokeh, but
no, we did them in Matplotlib. No,
oh, right.
So we have a few questions just about the project for you, Brian. So
Absolutely.
sort of background on it before we get into our roadmap discussion a bit later on. So first off, why was the project started? What really engendered the need for it?
Started around 2012. In a certain sense, it kind of grew out of some work that Peter Wang and myself both did on a library called Chaco a number of years earlier, around 2007 or 2008. And the point of that library was to provide a tool for very rich interactive visualizations. At the time, though, it was geared towards a rich client. You would write a Python application with Qt or GTK or WX Windows or something like that. But around 2012, around the time Continuum was starting, we wanted to sort of make that same kind of project, maybe learn some lessons from it, but also make it for the web. Like, it really occurred to us at the time that, that's where things need to be in the future. People want to publish things to websites or to internal sites or in Jupyter notebooks and all of that sort of thing. So we wanted to make a tool that was, sort of an updated version of Chaco, where we learned from some of the mistakes, because Chaco is a bit of a fiddly library. It ended up being a little bit hard for people to use just because there was a lot of knobs and dials. So we wanted to try to make something that was a little bit more friendly from the user's use perspective, but also update it for 2012 to put it in the browser. And so that's really the genesis of Bokeh.
Cool. So I think that also sort of answers our next question a bit about what need it fills, right? It fills this need on visualization and interactivity. A bit,
yeah,
right?
Although it's a little bit strange, it's morphed a little bit, or maybe my perception of it has morphed a bit over the years, right? We started out to set create a data visualization library. What it seems that we've created is sort of a web application framework that happens to plot graphs as well. When you consider the Bokeh server, but that's fine. We always wanted to have this component where you could back interactive live visualizations with real Python code running, and that's what the Bokeh server is about. But yeah, so that's pretty much the need.
Cool. And what sort of alternative projects are there out there other than Chaco? Is Chaco still around? And
every once in a while we still run into a person that uses Chaco, which amazes me because it is a very old project and it never had much of an uptake. It was in a race with Matplotlib, and Matplotlib won. And it became the sort of the de facto standard tool for visualization in Python. And Matplotlib is a great tool, and I think Chaco was a pretty interesting tool as well. It just didn't get that momentum at the time. But what are alternatives? It really depends on what exactly you want to do. If you're looking for just static graphs, Matplotlib is good. If you want to work in the in the notebook as well, Matplotlib is great for that too. Specifically in the realm of interactive visualizations, there's things like Plotly. There's new contenders like Altair and BQplot. I don't know if you've seen, I think Jake Vanderplas came up with this big sort of network graph that shows the relationships between all the different visualization packages in Python. And it's a pretty crowded space right now. And it doesn't even get into 3D packages like IVTK or Mojave, or I think the YT project is sort of geared towards astronomy. And there are just a lot of packages. Oh, of course, Seaborn built on top of Matplotlib for statistical graphs. I should mention HoloViews, of course. HoloViews is another high-level data EDA kind of library, but it's also really geared towards generating visualizations from that output. And so there's just a lot of tools. And what is an alternative kind of depends on exactly what you want to do. If you want to do things like EDA, Altair and HoloViews might be a great choice. HoloViews is built on top of Bokeh. Altair's built on top of Vega Lite. It may have a Bokeh backend that we write someday as well.
Wow, that was a huge number of name drops right there.
Yeah, there's a lot of. It's a very crowded space right now.
Yeah, no, it's impressive. So, what exactly is Bokeh actually built on top of technology-wise? Is it mostly on the Python side? Is it mostly on the JavaScript side? What are the internals?
Yeah, it's mostly on the JavaScript side. There's a library, Bokeh.js, which is a big JavaScript library, which is now actually written in TypeScript. We just finished porting from TypeScript from CoffeeScript. I think it was maybe one of the largest CoffeeScript programs I'd ever seen, the only one really. But it no longer is in CoffeeScript. It's now built in 100% TypeScript, which has been a really good boost for the project and very helpful for the developers. But that's where most of the implementation work is done. And then you can interface with that JavaScript library from other languages like Python, or there's an RBokeh package. There's also a Bokeh Scala package. We'd be happy to help anyone create a new language binding for Bokeh. There was a tweet a few weeks ago about someone playing around with, I think, a Bokeh Haskell integration. But all of these other languages is a very thin sort of wrapper. So on the Python side, there's a bit more weight because we built some higher level interfaces on top of just interfacing with Bokeh.js. But still, the Python side is fairly small comparatively. The main bulk of the code there is geared around automatically validating and serializing and properties from Python to JavaScript and keeping things in sync. But as far as the technology on the JavaScript side, it's pretty much, it's built directly on top of HTML5 canvas. It's written in TypeScript. We don't have a lot of dependencies there. We don't have a lot of dependencies on the Python side either. For Bokeh server applications, that's built on top of Tornado, and that's the main thing. But apart from that, really just NumPy. There's not much else that's needed.
Very cool. So shifting gears just a little bit, who maintains the project currently?
Currently, that's mostly me and also Mateusz Poprowski. There's been a lot of folks come through Bokeh over the years. Some of the more notable contributors, Sarah Bird, of course, worked on it a lot for a number of years, and she is fantastic. Claire Tang, was able to spend some time on it for a while. Havoc Pennington, right, from GTK and GNOME fame. He actually
cool.
the current version of the Bokeh server, the second generation, the one that works, the one that people were actually able to use. That was really designed and initially written by Havoc Pennington, who did, of course, an amazing job. Early on, there was Hugo Shi and Patty Mullen, Luke Canavan, of course. I shouldn't forget Luke. He's done a lot of great work, but a lot of other people as well. I mean, as Tony mentioned, there's 300 plus contributors on GitHub, and there's a big distribution of people that have come in and made a one fix, and we never hear from them again. And then now more and more, we're getting some people that are sort of repeat PRs. We've had a couple of folks lately who had repeat PRs, and I'm always happy to see that because pretty much if someone makes 2 solid PRs, I'm ready to add them to Bokeh Dev. Right, and have them start, pushing branches to the main repo and doing PRs from there because it's easier for us to collaborate and better for some other testing reasons as well. But yeah, that's the maintenance is a lot in the hands of me and Mateusz, but hopefully more and more in the hands of the community as time goes on.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you guys have a ton of contributors and a real community around the project. So.
We're getting there. One of the hurdles that we haven't passed yet, and I just realized I was thinking about it, is we haven't passed the have meetings together yet hurdle, right? So we've had meetings with the people that worked at Anaconda. We've had obviously internal meetings, but in terms of like outside contributors, it's not like we have a weekly meeting with anyone yet. So I'd love to get to a point where we have enough really interested, invested outside contributors where some of us can get together and sort of have regular meetings for guiding the project forward. But that's a hurdle we haven't quite cleared yet. But I'm hoping maybe this is the year for that or next year. So,
sure.
I know meetings are very exciting.
Yeah, you're muted, Tony. I think.
Being muted is probably better for everyone. So I was curious, where do you and the maintainers find yourself focusing on these days? What are some of the core focuses of the Bokeh project?
Right now, the absolute main focus is getting a 1.0 out, and we're very imminently close to that. We've actually started releasing 1.0 dev releases, so we've pushed the cart over the hill and down the rails, and we're fastly approaching that. I'm shooting for late August, early September. I had some other things going on in my life a little earlier this year that unfortunately took some time away from dealing with Bokeh. I had hoped to have one by SciPy. That would have been great, but we're a little bit past that. But that's okay. We're very, very close. We're committed now to having 1.0, and the main thing about that is just making sure that everything is in place that we want to keep, right, in terms of APIs and breakages. We want to, ironically, as we approach 1.0, there's been maybe a little bit of an uptick in sort of, breaking changes because it's sort of now or never. We have to get these changes out of the way and pay down this technical debt right now, or else we're stuck with it really for the long haul. And so we've kind of just, pulled the trigger and made some of these changes lately. But now we're trying to settle into a very more stable mode. And in terms of like features that we wanted to build into Bokeh, a lot of those are in place. Anything that's left is something that we can, maybe add without breaking changes later on. But right now, Mateusz is working on some final sort of layout changes. That's been sort of a sore point for us. We're a little bit over ambitious in what we tried to do, I think, with layout. And so we're trying to scale a little bit of that back. I'm working on some very exciting testing infrastructure. Our Selenium and browser integration tests have not been functional for a while. So I'm actually putting that back together right now. And then based on that, I actually want to fix some regressions that the data tables had. And so those are sort of the ones that I think that have to happen. And then, whatever else we can fit in terms of like some small features, I'd love to do that, or other bug fixes. But the main thing is just doing a top to bottom survey and making sure that everything, the APIs that are there, are the ones that we're happy with going forward. And then we can put that stamp of 1.0 on it, which really means that we're going to stand behind and defend those APIs. That's
really, really exciting.
It is very exciting after a number of years. It's quite exciting now to get to that point. And I'd be curious to see what things will be like afterwards, just because it's a sort of a different mode. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's not a lot of the big heavy lifting kind of work that we've had some of these, big PRs over the years where we really realize there's a big feature that needs to go in. It requires a lot of work, or there's some big technical debt that we want to pay down and refactor a bunch and have these big PRs. But it'll be different, but I think it'll also hopefully be more accessible for other contributors to come in because those kinds of changes, I think, are more accessible to new people as well. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's great. So I think up next, what we want to do is Tony had prepared, or found rather, the binder presentation of some of the Bokeh server stuff. And so I think we're going to just walk through that very quickly,
Sure.
just to give people an example of what Bokeh is and what it can do. So while he's going through that or getting that up and running and sharing his screen, I just had a quick question about you mentioned your Selenium tests.
Mm-hmm.
Have you thought, or do you have like headless browser tests that you also employ on the TypeScript side or JavaScript side? Or?
Yeah, we have a bunch of JavaScript tests that we run in some Node test framework at Mocha, I think, something like that. We don't run those in a browser because they're mostly unit tests. It's a little bit difficult to test Bokeh, to be perfectly honest. It's just a really big testing surface, and then when you multiply that by platforms and browsers, it gets bigger and bigger. But also, the fact that Bokeh, renders to an HTML5 canvas means that it's a little bit different than a lot of other, kinds of Selenium tests where you inspect the DOM in some sort of fairly straightforward way. If you render something to canvas, the canvas is just now in a big opaque bitmap, and so how do you sort of test that? And so we're struggling with finding good patterns for us to be able to test, but some of those are screenshot tests. We also do run all of the examples in the repository and all of the docs examples. We run those. We generate an image report, and it generates an image diff. We don't actually do a hard fail based on the results of that test yet. It's just a report that's available to us to inspect after every build. It's really useful. It might now be at the point where we can actually turn on failures. It used to be there were a lot of spurious sort of differences, and we didn't want to test failing all the time for spurious reasons. But I think we've gotten to the point where we might be able to turn that on as sort of a hard, yes or no failure. But definitely we'll have some Selenium tests that start to do that again. They'll be more simplistic than the examples. But also the Selenium test can test other things like, if you click on if you do a tap tool or something and you click on a glyph, can you actually have the custom.js callback execute it and pop up and make some change? Those are the kinds of things we can test. And data table, especially like I mentioned, I think we can actually do a lot of testing on the data table in particular, which is very much needed because it's sort of an intersection of a lot of things in Bokeh. And just it's complicated use, a lot of corner cases and use cases come together in the data table. And lately we've been sort of fixing one bug and causing another. And so that's why I sort of, bit the bullet and we want to get back and get the Selenium test working so we can really maintain like the data table, which is an important part of Bokeh going forward.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Tony, take it away.
Great. Well, it's really nice working in the SciPy ecosystem because we have nice documentation and all these great tools to access, but we can also play with them with Binder now. So the way that you can get to the Bokeh Binder is you'll often find the Bokeh docs first. So this is at PyData or bokeh.pydata.org. And then we can click on the GitHub link in the top right and scroll down in the README. And amongst the statistics, we'll see a live tutorial. And if we click Launch My Binder, it will spin up a demonstration or a Jupyter service that'll allow us to actually demo these notebooks live.
Just to quickly interject, sorry, Tony, the tutorial link at the top of the doc site you were first on also jumps to this page as well, directly here.
Oh, great, great. I'll go back to that just to show everybody. I did not, right here?
Yeah, that tutorial link at the very top on the navigation bar, that also goes to the same place. So
awesome.
Yep.
So click on the tutorial and you go right to Binder. Great. Do you have a favorite demo in here, Brian?
I'm not sure that I do. I think, recently, maybe the categorical stuff. So that was sort of a big addition last year. We had some problems with sort of supporting categorical data for a long time. There were some sort of silly limitations. We didn't support things like nested categorical things. And also it was kind of hard to spell. And so we had a pretty big refactor last year and overhauled sort of the support for categorical data. And now things that should have been easy, 3 years ago were finally made pretty easy. You think about it, sometimes you get lost in the weeds and you worry about making hard things, possible. You forget about making some of the, things that should be simple, really, really dead simple. And so, for a long time, it's kind of embarrassing. It was just kind of difficult to make a really good bar chart with Bokeh, but now it's not. And so you can go through the categorical stuff and you can see all the different kinds of charts that you can make here. But there's things besides bar charts. I think there's some of the categorical scatters with jitter, and there's a periodic table at the end, which is basically a categorical chart as well. So I think this is a nice one. I always like the there's the chapter about adding interactions with custom JS, custom JS callbacks, and I think that's a really useful topic for people. And so I think there's some fun stuff you can do in there as well. But the tutorial notebooks, would definitely benefit from input from anybody. I'd love to get other people to contribute new examples or chapters, or just if there's something that's missing that we can document better here for other people to learn from, that would be fantastic.
Tony, could you show some of the interactivity with some of these plots? I think that would be really cool to demonstrate.
Absolutely, but before we do that, it would be good to highlight anybody watching. If they're just learning Bokeh, this is probably a really great place to start contributing back to Bokeh. There are some clear problems or some clear examples that are spelled out in these tutorial notebooks that folks could contribute to.
Yeah, I think these days there's probably ways to hide solutions. When I wrote the notebooks, or I didn't write all of them, but when we worked on the notebooks initially, it didn't seem, some of those tools for making exercises with answers in them that, so the answer's hidden. If that's a thing that can be done, I think it'd be great to put the answers in line. We don't have that yet.
Right, so this is one of my favorite features of Bokeh, is being able to link the axes together, especially when you have the scrolling. Love these features. And then some more linked brushing. Oh, this is the one with the lasso, isn't it? Awesome. Great, and then it's very easy to add hover tools now, huh?
Yeah, I hope it's been fairly easy to add hover tools for quite a while, but now we did add some nice new features. Again, sometimes you forget about the simple things. Recently, we added a feature to the hover tool where you could just display the name of the glyph in the hover tool, which is actually something that's really important, and we just overlooked it for a long time. So this is why, getting people to, ask for features and submit bug requests is very important to drive development. But that, as well as sort of a level of indirection for hover tool tips as well, which is sort of useful in certain situations. But
so this is a nice segue here. Bokeh has its own set of widget tools, and there was actually a question in the webinar room. Now that some other projects like Plotly and Dash have started integrating more with widgets, or IPy widgets, does Bokeh have any considerations of those on the roadmap?
I just don't know. That's going to be a big question, and it's definitely not something we're going to get resolved before 1.0. Right now, you can use IPy widgets with Bokeh pretty well in a notebook. You can use the push notebook function to push updates to Bokeh content in a notebook without re-rendering it. You can push content to update a plot without redrawing the plot completely. And so you can put those kind of calls in callbacks for IPy widgets, and I think that works really well. And I think that we have several demonstrations of that. In terms of, Bokeh internalizing IPy widgets, I just don't know. It's going to be a big investigation. We obviously have our own method of serial. So the things are we have our own property system that's predates all of that, that we use for serialization. And, we can't rip all that out. That would be just an enormous, unbelievable undertaking. And so the question is, how well would IPy widgets play along with our, serialization, our own WebSocket protocol? And it's just hard to say, and I don't know. Because, for instance, the Bokeh property system is much richer than the IPy widgets property system, because we have a lot of different types of data types we need to serialize, and there's a lot of specialized data types. And so we can't just replace that wholesale with the IPy widgets wire protocol. So the question is, how well can we make them work together? And I don't know. That's definitely a post 1.0 question. That's all I can say about that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think, this is a great segue. So now we're going to kind of shift to talking about all of the roadmap items. So
sure.
Recently, Bokeh has developed a roadmap. I believe it's available somewhere on the website. It's also available at quansight.com/projects if anyone wants to go check that out. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you wanted to say a couple words about kind of broadly where the project is going, or if we just wanted to dive into the items directly and sort of talk about them individually.
I think like I said, where the project is going in the immediate term is just to get to this sort of plateau stability with a 1.0 release. And then, there's things that we can do on top of that won't be breaking changes for some time until we want to do a 2.0 release. So I think we can just start going down the list and talk about them, whichever ones you'd like to discuss.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. So the first item is the integration with Vega Lite and Altair. So do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, this has been asked for a few people. I think the idea, is to have a way to use the Altair API because people like it. It's very, economical for generating certain kinds of graphs, but be able to generate not necessarily the Vega Lite output in the notebook, but to generate a Bokeh document, right? And I guess the idea then is that you could take that document and dress it up. You could include it in a web application because it's a Bokeh document. You could add additional integrations to it, by adding your own tools and using the Bokeh API sort of after the fact. So that's the idea, is be able to use the Altair API but generate Bokeh output. And so that's something we'll hopefully get to work on. Probably again not before 1.0, but it's also something that's not a breaking change. So that's that's okay.
Very cool. Another element or another item on the roadmap is the visual design improvements. Could you?
Yeah, I just, so Bokeh is mostly the product of engineers, and I think in certain places that shows. I think we've done an okay job for, visual design by engineers, but I would love for someone who has actual, visual design expertise, training, background, to come help Bokeh look better, basically, and that could be both web development or just in terms of actual visual assets, or just picking some of the styling, for the way that the plots look, the default styling, and just tweaking that or changing it, maybe even in bigger ways. But it'd be nice to have someone who has an eye for visual design to become a contributor and to start helping more directly with that, because we've muddled through as a bunch of engineers, but I wouldn't claim that it, I would certainly claim that it could be done, even better and made to look even better. And I think that's one area where we just haven't had a lot of input.
Right. So the design or the idea there is really to have someone who is an expert on focusing on these kind of front endy pieces come in and do that design work, right? And so.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. So there's two parts to it. There's one part to it is literally just visual, design. What are the colors? What fonts? Picking these kinds of things. Are there ways we can make the docs more attractive? Whatever. All kinds of visual design questions. And then there is another facet where it's I'm just not, a great front end developer. I can't say that I am. And so in terms of how can we make Bokeh easier to integrate seamlessly into sort of the kind of web apps people want to make. That would be a great help, right? Right now you can run a Bokeh server and you can run it in a notebook. You can, create a sort of a standalone Bokeh server page, and you can embed the applications. But are there ways we can make that easier? What would a real front end dev want? And I just don't know the requirements well enough is the main reason. And I think there are people who know those kind of requirements better, who could really help out, make Bokeh just a very the front end of Bokeh even better to use and better to integrate.
Right. It really does seem like that kind of. That element of making things look pretty and usable and all that stuff is essential to the long-term viability of any of these products, right?
Yep.
Like Bokeh included. You just, at some point, you have to focus on those things.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, that's great to hear. I know that's not my skill either. So...
to date, I've sort of muddled through. I worked on Choco, I worked on their visualization systems, and when we started this project, I had basically no JavaScript experience at all, and I sort of muddled through on the basis of my prior work, writing visualization systems rather than my experience as a JavaScript or front-end developer. And maybe I know some things now, but I know there are people that know a lot more than I do and could really help supercharge, the appearance and the integration capabilities of Bokeh.
So this is the kind of thing in specific that Bokeh might be looking for funding for example, right? To go out and find these kind of people to help out. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. If places have visual designers that are interested in this, or front end dev designers, and they want to donate some time for those people to spend on Bokeh, that's another option as well. People have expressed interest in maybe having some of their documentation people work on Bokeh for a certain amount of time, and that's the kind of certainly direct contributions are great, but I think contributions of time can be good as well. So. Yeah,
it's great. So next up on the roadmap was to develop Bokeh.js as a first-class JavaScript library. So
yep,
that's another thing people could fund to help out with.
Absolutely. It's a little bit of an extension. I kind of veered into that a little bit with the last answer, but the idea is just that there's been some interest in having Bokeh.js be used directly by JavaScript devs, no Python involved. And you can do that now, but I think it could be made probably better and easier and more standard. I think Bokeh is probably a little bit of an unusual JavaScript library by JavaScript standards again, because I didn't have a lot of JavaScript experience when I started it, and other people have come along and helped make that a lot better than it used to be. But still, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And but again, the main problem that I have is I don't have the requirements. I'm not really a front end developer in the sense of developing a lot of web apps or that sort of thing. And so I don't really know. I just haven't been able to keep up with the JavaScript toolset because they do seem to change very often from my limited perspective. And so it'd be great to have people who are really familiar with popular and long-lasting tools in the JavaScript world to help find ways to integrate Bokeh. But there's also other just support work around, making Bokeh.js be a lot better documented. Bokeh.js used to be an implementation detail, basically. And so it didn't start out being very documented, and it still is not super documented. And so, we need to have a big round of work to help make Bokeh.js more usable from the JavaScript developer's perspective. I think that's an important task because there is an interest in that. People have asked about it. I always sort of think people just use D3 always or default to that, but or other libraries in JavaScript. But there seems to be a steady and increasing interest in using Bokeh.js directly. So we want to try to service that need.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the Webgl front end and throughput and sort of what that means for Bokeh and how and sort of who would be needed to do that kind of work?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone with OpenGL experience perhaps, or definitely WebGL experience would be great. There's a library that I'm passingly familiar with called Regal, which looks like it's pretty interesting as a sort of a higher level WebGL library that I've wanted to investigate. The current WebGL support was written by Almer Klein. Almer Klein doesn't really work on Bokeh anymore. He's just moved on to other things. And so I don't have any WebGL experience. So, maintaining that is a bit of a difficulty for me. I thought, well, I want to go back and, instead of founding it on the tools that it's founded on now, maybe look at Regal as sort of a higher level library that we could use to build out Bokeh support. Maybe we would even just move to WebGL rendering, for everything someday. I don't know. All that work would be accelerated, of course, by having someone with the right experience. Because right now, as it stands, for me to go do it or Mateus to go do it, we'd all have to go climb a pretty steep learning curve just to get started on that. And so that's, again, an area where someone with the right experience I think can help accelerate things greatly. But it's definitely nice to have that WebGL support. We do currently have some WebGL support in Bokeh for a limited set of glyphs. And the reason that's nice is because it pushes the capabilities of Bokeh up a little bit higher, right? If you use, Bokeh is really geared towards interactivity and it's on the HTML canvas. Right now, you can plot tens of thousands of points. Once you start to get to hundreds of thousands of points, that's really when you want WebGL to sort of maintain that interactivity. And beyond that, of course, Bokeh integrates pretty well with Datashader, especially, HoloViews integrates Datashader and Bokeh really well together. So if you've got 1 billion points or 100 million points, that's when you start to think about Datashader. But we'd like to have Bokeh a little bit more accessible in that middle area of, hundreds of thousands or a few millions of points as well directly.
Yeah, that's awesome. That would be great. Before we wrap up our roadmap discussion, are there any other pieces of the roadmap? There's a lot of other items on there, but is there anything else you wanted to specifically highlight?
Yeah,
that
sure.
You think would be looking for support in?
I can just run through some of those really quickly. Like some of them are already kind of done. Better theming and some of the layout work has been done and is ongoing. There's a task there for patches with holes, right? That's really just needed for GIS work or contour maps. And surprisingly, it's mostly just a tedious matter of how do you actually want to represent that data. Maybe you want a new data source, but that's one that's interesting. Improve the documentation, organization, accessibility. This is something I would love to get help with, right? I'm not really one to toot my own horn, but I will in this instance. I know I've been working in open source or with open source projects for the better part of 30 odd years. And, I've run into a lot of projects that have no documentation or just threadbare documentation or, wrong documentation. By that metric, I think Bokeh is pretty good. And I tried to put a lot of effort into making it very thorough and comprehensive, but still obviously is the case just by the nature of the support requests we get. It's not organized necessarily in a way that reaches everyone. And so if there's someone who has a really good background in sort of information design for documentation, who wants to come help make the documentation better and more accessible for people, I would love to have that help. Because I think I've sort of reached my limit of what I know how to do or the kind of documentation I know how to write. It's the documentation I want, right? that I want to have. I don't know what other kind of documentation to write. I can write more of it, but it's not going to be arranged differently. And I think maybe that's where we need some of the work is to arrange it differently to make it more accessible. And so I'd love to get help with that. Let's see, there's an issue about built-in LaTeX NaphTeX support. You can sort of do that now with a custom extension. Obviously, it'd be nice if you could just put in $ quotes and have a formula render as your access title or something. I think we can get to that after 1.0 as well. again, not a breaking change. So that's about it. But anyway, that's, I think, probably the main ones that I would mention from that list.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are very open to taking support in kind of any way that it could come. And there's a lot of things left to do even after 1.0, so that's exciting. Your scope is very large. So I think at this point we're now going to open it up to user questions. And so I know that we've got a few questions come in while we've been chatting here, but if anyone else wants to post a question to the chat, feel free. So I think our first question comes from David. So the question is, another possible direction for Bokeh is integration with other libraries like Dask's web interface. Is this something that is on the roadmap?
I wouldn't say explicitly. I mean, so I think the Dask tool is a fantastic one. Matt Rockland has been just amazing in his usage and pushing Bokeh and making it better. We did recently add a new test. We run the Dask test suite. So Dask has a Bokeh subset of tests, and we run those on Travis CI to get an informative report to make sure we haven't broken anything. Because for a while again, but Bokeh is moving kind of fast, and maybe we're having some breaking changes here and there, and we'd like to get to the point where we're not having that. So I would love to integrate more upstream test suites, right? If you're using Bokeh and you can expose a test suite, I'd love to add it to our downstream. Our downstream tests, so that make sure that we're not breaking anyone who's using Bokeh downstream. That said, my role in that really has been one of an advisor, right? So I've been pretty heads down on Bokeh itself, and so if people want to use Bokeh, want to integrate Bokeh into some tool, I try to be as available as I can to answer those questions. But I'm not typically driving those. Like I guess I'm not really the idea person. Matt Rockland had the idea for this great UI for Dask, and he decided to try to use Bokeh, and so I was able to help him, and Luke Kenneman actually was able to help him a lot. To get that up and running, and I think it's been a fantastic result. But that's really more of the case of not Bokeh necessarily driving that, where it's people saying, "Hey, I want to use Bokeh and I want to integrate it into my project, and how do I do that? And how can we do that?" Sometimes there's feature work that needs to happen to help make that happen. But oftentimes it's just sort of a more consulting or advising, providing guidance. So it's not specifically on Bokeh's roadmap, but I would love to help people integrate Bokeh into whatever projects they have.
Yeah, cool. That'd be great. Are there any other questions from our viewers before we round out this session? I think we answered David's other question a little earlier about widgets. So it doesn't look like we've got any others coming in. So I think we can go ahead and wrap that. Oh, Travis asks. Travis Oliphant asks, what do you think about a Viz Summit to bring core devs from multiple projects, specifically, in this case, visualization projects?
Sure. I mean, I think that could be helpful. I do think the problem, if you talk about how do we, what do we do about this sort of giant landscape of projects, that's a people problem, and that's actually a much harder problem often than a lot of the technical problems, because people are solving their own problems that are in front of them, and then at the end of the day you've got now 4 or 5 solutions to different projects, and some of them overlap, and how do you bring those together? That's a really hard problem, and it requires a very sustained effort and commitment from people on all of the projects involved. Which isn't to say I don't think a summit wouldn't be useful, especially maybe in the context of num focus. Maybe we could bring some folks together at some of the num focus summits. There was one at SciPy. I didn't attend SciPy this year, so I wasn't able to go, but I do understand a lot of folks got together at SciPy for a VizBoth. And I think the consensus there is a bit gloomy, is that we've got all these projects and we're probably just going to have all these projects for the foreseeable future, and they sort of cater to different niches. But I'm certainly always happy to discuss collaboration or integration points. Again, we've talked about trying to make an Altair a back end that can sort of emit or basically have Bokeh be able to ingest Vega Lite. Maybe that's a better way of putting the Altair integration is, Altair spits out Vega Lite. Let's maybe make it so that Bokeh can ingest Vega Lite and generate Bokeh visualizations. But other types of integration are definitely, I think, a lot harder people problem. But, it's always good to get people in a room and discuss these questions. So I think that's could be a good thing.
Yeah, aren't they all people problems always? Right. So I think that brings up an interesting point, right? Bokeh is a num-focus fiscally sponsored project, correct?
Yes, so just as of I think late last year. It was always on our mind for quite a long time, but for a while, all the development happened by developers who were in sort of Continuum or Anaconda, and the bylaws of NumFocus are like we have to have a certain number of people from different organizations come together, and that's eventually what we were able to get enough people together to form the Bokeh committee. But we've always wanted to do that for a long time, and I'm really glad it's been a great positive change for Bokeh, both in terms of just joining that great group of projects, but also getting some additional exposure. And I definitely think it's a good place for Bokeh to be going forward.
Yeah, that's excellent. Great.
Will we see at any of the Bokeh developers at any conferences coming up, like JupyterCon perhaps?
I'm not aware of anyone at JupyterCon specifically. There is the NumFocus Summit that a couple of us are going to be at in New York later this year. I'll be at PyBay actually next month. I'm giving a tutorial there, and this is, I'm hoping, going to be sort of a definitive tutorial. I would have liked to have 1.0 out before that. I'm not sure that's going to happen right then, but it's close enough that I think I can give sort of the definitive. Here's a Bokeh tutorial that will work for the ages and going forward. Because obviously, if you go back 4 years and you find like a tutorial I gave at PyData London or something, some of that stuff is still useful and some of it's not. But I'd like to give sort of the first 1.0 very definitive tutorial, and that's coming up at PyBay rather in San Francisco in August. And then beyond that, I'm not sure. There were some folks who spoke at SciPy. You can find I think a HoloViews or PyViz tutorial where some of that was centered around Bokeh, and then I think there were some other talks as well. But I don't have any immediate plans. I've taken a little bit of a hiatus from travel in the last week. I did a lot of traveling for about 3 years, and I sort of took an intentional hiatus for the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, and I may be getting ready to start trying to give a few more talks here and there, but not in the immediate future except for PyBay.
Great, thank you.
So I think for our last question from David, again, is he says, I think a very nice feature of Bokeh is streaming data. At the time he tried it last, it needed a separate server. Is this still the case, or has that been integrated into the notebook?
Well, there's a couple of ways to approach the answer to that. One is that you can now run Bokeh server applications directly in the notebook, right? You define a function that sort of creates a Bokeh document, you pass that to show, and then you get that Bokeh application in an output cell, and that's just like a Bokeh, you don't have to run the Bokeh server yourself. It just attaches itself to the Jupyter IO loop and sort of runs itself there automatically. So if the idea is just having less things to do to get that kind of work, you can do that now with less friction, because you can just create a Bokeh server application in the notebook and run it with show, and it just pops up. But there might be reasons why you don't want to do that either. And you can still use push notebook. And I believe you can use stream with push notebook now. There was a time in the past when this push notebook function had a completely separate protocol from the Bokeh server protocol, but that was unified quite some time ago, and now that's really good. Now they use the exact same wire protocol, and so I believe you can use streaming with push notebook now. But of course, I would say you can also just create a Bokeh server application very easily. And if you go to the examples how to server embed directory in the GitHub repo, there is a notebook embed example there, and you can see exactly how to integrate a Bokeh server application into a notebook without having to run the server separately.
Excellent, thank you, and thank all our watchers and listeners for their questions. Now it is time for our famous rant section. So everyone gets about 15 seconds to discuss any topic of their choice. Tony, first up, it's your soapbox.
Don't put security codes or API tokens into Binder, please. It's not safe.
Just don't have them. Just don't use them for anything at all, ever.
All right, exactly. And Brian, did you have a rant you wanted to share? Or?
Yeah, please put version information with any question or any answer on Stack Overflow or anywhere really, because oftentimes the question can be answered immediately based on that. And failing that, or well, not failing that, but also please always try to put a minimum complete example to reproduce whatever problem you've got. That certainly helps. Oftentimes I can answer a question immediately if I just run it, and I can say there's the answer. But if I can't run it, what's the odds that I'm going to spend a lot of time to recreate it? So just to make a minimum complete example, and I'll run it, and I'll probably be able to get you an answer very quickly, or with someone else.
For my part, getting sick on the plane home from SciPy is totally overrated. # first world problems. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks for listening. You can find us on Twitter at Quansight AI. If you're interested in funding open source projects, including Bokeh, you can find all of their project roadmaps at quansight.com/projects. Brian, where can people find you, and where can people find Bokeh?
Yeah, so on Twitter, the project is under at Bokeh Plots, so BOKEHPLOTS. Of course, on GitHub, there's a Bokeh organization, and the main repo is just Bokeh/Bokeh on GitHub. The docs are at bokeh.pydata.org. There's a demo site for server apps at demo.bokehplots.com. I know I'm really just spewing out a lot of information here. Of course, there's a Bokeh tag on Stack Overflow. We try to monitor that as best we can. And there's also a Gitter chat channel for Bokeh as well if you go on Gitter.
That's great. So thanks, everybody. Join us again next episode for what I believe will be a discussion on Spider. And
Great.
Thanks again, Brian. So,
awesome. Great.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.